India and the Prerequisites of Communism by Babasaheb Ambedkar. Chapter 1, Part 3. If the Hindu social order is not based on equality and fraternity, what are the principles on which it is based? There is only one answer to this question. Though few will be able to realize what they are, there is no doubt as to their nature and effect on Hindu society. The Hindu social order is reared on three principles. Among these, the first and foremost is the principle of graded inequality. That the principle of graded inequality is a fundamental principle is beyond controversy. The four classes are not on a horizontal plane, different but equal. They are on a vertical plane, not only different, unequal in status, one standing above the other. In the scheme of Manu, the Brahmin is placed at the first in rank. Below him is the Kshatriya. Below the Kshatriya is the Vaishya. Below Vaishya is the Shudra. And below the Shudra is the Ati Shudra or the untouchable. This order of precedence among the classes is not merely conventional. It is spiritual, moral, and legal. There is no sphere of life which is not regulated by this principle of graded inequality. One can substantiate this by numerous illustrations from the Manusmriti. I will take 4 illustrations to prove the point. They will be of the law of slavery, law of marriage, law of punishment, and law of samskaras and the law of sannyas. The Hindu law recognized slavery as a legal institution. Manusmriti recognized 7 kinds of slaves. Narada Smriti recognized 15 kinds of slaves. These differences as to the number of slaves and the classes under which they fall is a matter of no importance. What is important is to know that one could enslave and who could enslave whom. On this point, the following citations from the Narada Smriti and the Yajnavalkya Smriti are revealing. Narada Smriti 5:39. In the inverse order of 4 castes, slavery is not ordained except where a man violates the duty peculiar to his caste. Slavery in that respect is analogous to the condition of a wife. Yajnavalkya Smriti 16:183-2. Slavery is in the descending order of the Varnas and not in the ascending order. Recognition of slavery was bad enough, but if the rule of slavery had been left free to take its own course, it would have at least one beneficial effect. It would have been a leveling force. The foundation of caste would have been destroyed. For under it, a Brahmin might have become the slave of the untouchable, and the untouchable would have been the masters of the Brahmin. But it was seen that unfettered slavery was a principle, and an attempt was made to nullify it. Manu and his successors, therefore, while recognizing slavery, ordained that it shall not be recognized in its inverse order to the Varna system. That means that a Brahmin may become the slave of another Brahmin, but he shall not be the slave of a person of another Varna, that is, of the Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, or Ati Shudra. On the other hand, a Brahmin may hold as his slave anyone belonging to the 4 Varnas. A Kshatriya can have a Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and Ati Shudra as his slaves, but not one who is a Brahmin. A Vaishya can have a Vaishya, Shudra, and Ati Shudra as his slaves, but not one who is a Brahmin or a Kshatriya. A Shudra can have a Shudra and an Ati Shudra as his slaves, but not a Brahmin, Kshatriya, or Vaishya. And an Ati Shudra can hold an Ati Shudra as his slave, but not one who is a Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra. Another illustration of this principle of graded inequality is to be found in the laws of marriage. Manu says 3:12. For the first marriage of the twice-born classes, a woman of the same class is recommended, but for such are as impelled by inclination to marry again, women in the direct order of the classes are to be preferred. 3:13. A Shudra woman must only be the wife of the Shudra. She and a Vaishya of a Vaishya, they two, and a Kshatriya of a Kshatriya, those 3, and a Brahmani of a Brahmin. Manu is of course opposed to intermarriage. His injunction is for each class to marry within his class. But he does recognize marriage outside the defined class. Here again, he is particularly careful not to allow intermarriage to do harm to his principle of inequality among classes. Like slavery, he permits intermarriage, but not in the inverse order. A Brahmin, when marrying outside his class, may marry any woman from any of the classes below him. A Kshatriya is free to marry a woman of the two classes below him, namely Vaishya and Shudra, but must not marry a man from the Brahmin class which is above him. A Vaishya is free to marry a woman from the Shudra class which is below him, but he cannot marry a woman from the Brahmin or Kshatriya which is above him. The third illustration is to be found in the rule of law as enunciated by Manu. First, as to the treatment to be given to witnesses. According to Manu, they are to be sworn as follows. 887. In the forenoon, let the judge, being purified, severely call on the twice born, being purified also, to declare the truth in the presence of some image, a symbol of the divinity and of Brahmins, while the witnesses turn their faces either to the north or to the east. 888. To a Brahmin, he must begin with saying, declare. To a Kshatriya, with saying, declare the truth. To a Vaishya, admonishing him by mentioning his kind grain of gold. To a Shudra, threatening him with the guilt of every kind and of every kind that causes loss of caste. Take the punishment of offences as laid down by Manu. To begin with punishment for defamation. 8,267. A soldier defaming a priest shall be fined 100 panas, merchant thus offending, 150 or 200, but for such an offence a mechanic or servile man shall be whipped. 8,268. A priest shall be fined 50 if he slanders a soldier, 25 if a merchant, and 12 if he slanders a man of the servile class. Take the offences of insult. The punishment prescribed by Manu is as follows. 8,270. A Shudra who insults a Dvija with gross invectives ought to have his tongue slit, for he sprang from the lowest part of Brahma. 8,271. If he mentions their names and classes with contumely, as if he says, O Devadatta, thou refused of Brahmin, an idle style, 10 fingers long, shall be thrust into his mouth. 8,272. Should he, through pride, give instructions to Brahmins concerning their duty, let the king order some hot oil to be dropped into his mouth and his ear. For the punishment for the offence of abuse, Manu says, 8,276. For mutual abuse by a Brahmin and a Kshatriya, this fine must be imposed by a learned king, the lowest on the Brahmin and the middlemost on the soldier. 8,277. A Vaishya and a Shudra must be punished exactly in the same manner according to their respective castes, except the slitting of the tongue of the Shudras. This is the fixed rule of punishment. Punishment for the offence of assault. Manu propounds 8,279. With whatever limb Shudra shall assault or hurt a Dvija, that limb shall be cut off. This is the accordance of Manu. Punishment for the offence of arrogance. Accordingly to Manu. 8,281. A Shudra who shall insolently place himself on the same seat with a man of high caste shall either be branded on his hip and be banished, or the king shall cause a gash to be made on his buttock. 8,282. Should he spit on him through pride, the king shall order both his lips to be gashed. Should he urinate on him, his penis. Should he break wind against him, his anus. 8,283. If he seizes the Brahmin by the locks, or likewise if he takes him by the feet, let the king unhesitatingly cut off his hands, or by his beard, or by the throat, or by the scrotum. Punishment for the offence of adultery, says Manu 8,359. A man who is not a Brahmin who commits actual adultery ought to suffer death, for the wives, indeed, of all the four classes must ever be most especially guarded. 8 to 366. A Shudra who makes love to a damsel of high birth ought to be punished corporally, but he who addresses a maid of equal rank shall give the nuptial present and marry her if her father desires it. 8. 374. A Shudra having an adulterous connection with a woman of a twice-born class, whether guarded at home or unguarded, shall thus be punished in the following manner. If she was unguarded, he shall lose the part offending and all his property. If guarded, everything, even his life. 8. 375. For adultery with a guarded Brahmin, a Vaishya shall forfeit all his wealth after imprisonment for a year. A Kshatriya shall be fined 1,000 panas and he be shaved with the urine of an ass. 8. 376. But if a Vaishya or Kshatriya commits adultery with an unguarded Brahmin, the king shall only fine the Vaishya 500 panas and the Kshatriya 1,000. 8. 377. But even these two, however, if they commit that offence with a Brahmini not only guarded but the wife of an eminent man, shall be punished like a Shudra, or be burned in a fire of dry grass or reeds. 8. 382. If a Vaishya approaches a guarded female of the Kshatriya or a Kshatriya a guarded Vaishya woman, they both deserve the same punishment as in the case of an unguarded Brahmin female. 8. 383. But a Brahmin who shall commit adultery with a guarded woman of those two classes must be fined 1,000 panas, and for offending with a Shudra woman, the fine of 1,000 panas or a Kshatriya or Vaishya. 8. 384. For adultery by a Vaishya with a woman of the Kshatriya classes, if guarded, the fine is 500, but the Kshatriya for committing adultery on a Vaishya woman must be shaved with urine or pay the fine just mentioned. How strange is the contrast between Hindu and non-Hindu criminal jurisprudence? How inequality is writ large in Hinduism as seen in its criminal jurisprudence. In a penal code charged with the spirit of justice, we find two things: a section dealing with defining the crime and a section prescribing a rational form of punishment for breach of it, and a rule that all offenders are liable to the same penalty. In Manu, what do we find? First, an irrational system of punishment. The punishment for a crime it is inflicted on the origin concerned in the crime, such as belly, tongue, nose, eyes, ears, organs of generation, etc. As if the offending organ was sentiment having a will for its own and had not been merely a survivor of human being. Second feature of Manu's penal code is the inhumane character of the punishment, which has no proportion to the gravity of the offense. But the most striking feature of Manu's penal code, which stands out in all its nakedness, is the inequality of punishment for the same offense. Inequality designed not merely to punish the offender, but to protect also the dignity and to maintain the baseness of the parties coming to a court of law to seek justice. In other words, to maintain the social inequality on which his whole scheme is founded. The principle of graded inequality has been carried into the economic field. From each according to his ability to each according to his need is not the principle of Hindu social order. The principle of the Hindu social order is from each according to his need to each according to his nobility. Supposing an officer was distributing dole to a famine-stricken people, he would be bound to give greater dole to a person of high birth man than he would be to a person of low birth. Supposing an officer was levying taxation, he would be bound to assess a person of high birth at a lower rate than he would to a person of low birth. The Hindu social order does not recognize equal need, equal work, or equal ability as the basis of reward for labor. Its motto is that in regard to the distribution of the good things of life, those who are reckoned as the highest must get the most, and the best and those who are classed as the lowest must accept the least and the worst. Nothing more seems to be necessary to prove that the Hindu social order is based on the principle of graded inequality. It pervades all departments of social life. Every side of social life is protected against the dangers of equality. The second principle on which the Hindu social order is founded is that of fixate of occupations for each class and continuance thereof by heredity. This is what Manu says about occupations of the four classes. 187. But in order to protect this universe, he, the most Resplendent one assigned separate duties and occupation to those who sprang from his mouth, arm, thigh, feet. 88. To Brahmanas he assigned teaching and studying the Vedas, sacrificing for their own benefit, and for others, giving and accepting of alms. 189. The Kshatriya he commanded to protect the people, to bestow gifts, to offer sacrifices, to study the Veda, and to abstain from attaching himself to sensual pleasures. 90. The Vaishya to tend cattle, to bestow gifts, to other sacrifices, to study the Vedas, and to abstain from attaching himself to sensual pleasures. 91. One occupation only the Lord prescribed to the Shudra, to serve meekly, even these other three castes. These rules regarding the occupations of the different classes are further amplified by Manu, as will be seen from the following citations from his Smriti. 188. To Brahmanas, he, Swayambha Manu, assigned the duties of reading the Veda, of teaching it, of sacrificing, of assisting others to sacrifice, of giving alms if they be rich, and if indigent, of receiving of gifts. 89. To defend the people, to give alms, to sacrifice, to read the Veda, to shun the allurements of sensual gratification are, in a few words, the duties of a Kshatriya. 90. To keep herds of cattle, to bestow largeness, to sacrifice, to read the scriptures, to carry on trade, to lend it interest, and to cultivate land are prescribed or permitted to a Vaishya. 91. One principal duty the supreme ruler assigns to a Shudra, namely, to serve the before mentioned classes without depreciating their worth. 1074. Let such Brahmins as are intent on the means of attaining the supreme Godhead and firm in their own duties completely perform in order the six following acts. 75. Reading the Vedas, teaching others to read them, sacrificing and assisting others to sacrifice, giving to the poor if themselves have enough, and accepting gifts from the virtuous if themselves are poor, and are prescribed the six acts of the firstborn class. 76. But among those six acts of a Brahmin, three are his main subsistence: assisting to sacrifice, teaching the Vedas, and receiving gifts from a pure handed giver. 77. Three acts of duty cease with the Brahmin and belong not to the Kshatriya: teaching the Vedas, officiating at a sacrifice, and receiving presents. 78. Those three are also, by the fixed rule of law, forbidden to the Vaishyas, since Manu, the lord of all men, prescribed not those acts to the two classes, military and commercial. 79. The means of subsistence peculiar to the Kshatriya are bearing arms, either held for striking or missile, to the Vaishya merchandise, attending on cattle and agriculture, but with a view to the next life. The duties of both are alms giving, readying, and sacrificing. Every member must follow the trade assigned to the class to which he belongs. It leaves no scope for individual choice, individual inclination. An individual under the Hindu social order is bound to the profession of his ancestor. It is an inexorable law from which he cannot escape. The principle does not stop with the fixate of occupation. It grades the several occupation in terms of respectability. This is what Manu says. 80. Among the several occupations for gaining a livelihood, the most commendable, respectively, from the Brahmin, Kshatriya, and Vaishyas, are the teaching of the Vedas, defending the people, and trade. The third principle on which the Hindu social order is founded is the fixation of people within their respective classes. There is nothing strange or peculiar in the fact that the Hindu social order recognizes classes. There are classes everywhere, and no society is without them. Families, cliques, clubs, political parties, nay, communities, gangs engaged in criminal conspiracies, business corporations which prey upon the public, are to be found in all societies in all parts of the world. Even a free social order will not be able to get rid of the classes. What a free social order aims to do is to prevent isolation and exclusiveness being regarded by the classes as an ideal to be followed. For so long as the classes do not practice isolation and exclusiveness, they are not only non social in their relations towards one another. Isolation and exclusiveness make them antisocial and inimical towards one another. Isolation makes for rigidity of class consciousness, for institutionalizing social life, and for the dominance of selfish ideals within the classes. Isolation makes life static, continues the separation into privileged and underprivileged, masters and servants. Not so much the existence of classes, the spirit of isolation and exclusiveness, which is inimical with a free social order. What a free social order endeavors to do is to maintain all channels of social endowment. This is possible only when the classes are free to share in an extensive number of common interests, undertakings, and expenses, have a large number of values in common, when there is a free play back and forth, when they have an equable opportunity to receive and to take from others. Such social contracts must and does dissolve custom, makes for an alert and expanding mental life, and not only occasion but also demand reconstruction of mental attitudes. What is striking about the Hindu social order is its ban on free interchange and intercourse between different classes of Hindu society. There is a ban against interdining and intermarriage, but Manu goes to the length of interdicting ordinary social intercourse. Says Manu 4:244. He who seeks to preserve an exalted rank must constantly form connections with the highest and best families, but avoid the worst and the meanest. 245. Since a priest who connects himself with the best and the highest of men, avoiding the lowest and worst, attains eminence, but sinks by an opposite conduct to the class of the servile. 79. Not let him tarry even under the shade of the same tree which outcasts on the great crimes, nor with Chindalas, nor with Pukasas, nor with idiots, nor with man proud of wealth, nor with Ashkramen and other vile persons, nor with Arthya Savins. The Hindu social order is opposed to fraternity. It does not admit the principle of equality. Far from recognizing equality, it makes inequality its official doctrine. What about liberty? So far as choice of occupation goes, there is none. Everyone has his occupation determined for them. Only thing left to do is to carry it on. As to freedom of speech, it exists, but it only exists for those who are in favor of the social order. The freedom is not the freedom of liberalism which was expressed by Voltaire when he said, I wholly disapprove of what you say and will defend to the death your right to say it. This is clear from what Manu has to say about logic and dialectics. 4:29 to 30. No guest must stay in his house without being honored according to his ability with a seat, food, or couch, water, or roots and fruits. Let him not honor even by greeting heretics, men who follow forbidden occupations, men who live with cats, rogues, logicians arguing against the Veda, and those who live like herons. 2:10. But by Shruti, revelation, is meant the Vedas, and by Smriti, tradition, the institutes of the sacred law. Those two must not be called into question in any manner, since from those two the sacred law shone forth. 11. Every twice born man who, relying on the institutions of dialectics, treats with contempt those two sources of the law, must be cast out by the virtuous as an atheist and a scorner of the Veda. 12. The Veda, the sacred tradition, the customs of virtuous men, and one's own pleasure, they declare to be visibly the fourfold means of defining the sacred law. The reasons for this are made manifest by Manu, who says 6. The whole Veda is the first source of the sacred law. Next, the tradition and the virtuous conduct of those who know the Veda. Further, also the customs of holy men, and finally, self satisfaction. 7. Whatever law has been ordained for any person by Manu, that has been fully declared in the Veda. For that sage was omniscient. In this freedom, there is not freedom from dialecticians, no freedom for logicians to criticize the social order, which means there is no freedom at all. What about liberty of action? In the sense of effective choice, there is no room for it in the Hindu social order. The Hindu social order leaves no choice to the individual. It fixes his occupation, it fixes his status. All that remains for the individual is to conform himself to these regulations. The same must be said with regard to political liberty. The Hindu social order does not recognize the necessity of a representative government composed of the representative chosen by the people. Representative government rests on the belief that people must be governed by law, and law can be only made by a representative of the people. The Hindu social order recognizes the first part of this thesis, which says that people must be governed by law, but it denies the second part, which says that law can be made only by the representatives chosen by the people. The tenets of the Hindu social order is that the law by which people are to be governed is already made and is to be found in the Vedas. Nobody has a right to add to or subtract from it. That being so, a representative assembly of the people is unnecessary. Political liberty, which is liberty to frame laws and to make unmake government, is futility for which there is no place in the Hindu social order. To sum up, the Hindu social order is an order based on classes and not on individual. It is an order in which classes are graded one above the other. It is an order in which the status and function of the classes are determined and fixed. The Hindu social order is a rigid order. No matter what changes take place in the relative position of an individual, his social status as a member of the class he is born in relation to another person belonging to another class shall in no way be affected. The first shall never become the last, and the last shall never become the first. The end.